Khalil stood frozen, hands raised, code-stained fingers, mistaken for a threat. He just saved a $2 billion launch, yet security called him unauthorized. In the room he designed, they asked him if he was lost. One wrong answer, and his genius would be erased in handcuffs. But what they didn't know was who was watching. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The gates of Orion Space Command opened like jaws, swallowing Khalil Morrison whole. He stepped out of the black government-issued SUV, his shoes crunching over the gravel, eyes tracing the sleek, towering silhouette of the lab facility ahead. It looked like something pulled from the future glass, steel white stone, but the air around it was stuck in something much older. Inside, everything was sterile perfection, cold, crisp, humming with electricity and authority. The badge clipped to Khalil's chest still smelled like the plastic it was printed on. It read, Morrison, Khalil, Aero Engineer, LVL-7X. Below the ink, his reflection stared back at him from the laminated gloss. A young black man with soft locks tied back, eyes steady but scanning. Every movement he made echoed. His official onboarding lasted less than 6 minutes. No welcome speech. No small talk. The HR rep, a woman named Diane, with a tight bun and tighter smile, handed him a keycard and muttered, "You'll be in Beijing. Follow the blue line on the floor." Then she picked up a call and turned her chair without another word. Beijing was immaculate. Rows of consoles, diagnostic stations, simulation rigs. Everything was state-of-the-art, except the way they looked at him. Eyes flicked up, then quickly down. Some smiled, but the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. One engineer, a pale man with red hair and wire-rimmed glasses, leaned toward his colleague and whispered behind his laptop. The colleague glanced up at Khalil, then chuckled low. Khalil introduced himself with a polite nod to everyone. No one returned the gesture. He felt like a drop of ink in a glass of milk. 2 hours into his first day, he attended the Flight Trajectory Review meeting for Project Vesta, a deep atmosphere booster program with a 10-year pipeline. He'd studied the schematics thoroughly, even prepared a few optimization suggestions for orbital fuel conservation. When he raised his hand to speak, the lead systems analyst, Dr. Halvorson, cut him off mid-sentence. "We'll revisit that later," Halvorson said flatly. "Let's stick to the plan for now." But 5 minutes later, a junior engineer named Chris White, mid-20s, fresh out of MIT, made the same suggestion. Everyone nodded. "Now that's thinking ahead," Halvorson said, slapping the table. Khalil didn't speak again. At lunch he sat alone in the corner of the mess hall, with a chicken salad and a copy of Applied Orbital Mechanics. Around him, clusters of engineers laughed and joked, some discussing code, others vacation plans. He caught the tail end of a conversation near the soda machine. "I mean, he's sharp, I guess, but it's obvious why they hired him."
"Yeah, DI points. Gotta get those government incentives."
They didn't whisper low enough. Khalil heard every word. In the weeks that followed, the pattern became clearer. When he emailed suggestions to the team, they were ignored until someone else reworded them and sent them back around. When a simulation crashed during one of his shifts, he spent 14 hours debugging it alone. The next morning, Strickland, the base commander himself, called him into his office. "You trying to show off, Morrison?" Strickland asked, leaning back in a leather chair, fingers steepled. "Pulling long shifts, rewriting code no one asked you to touch." "I was fixing a bug in the engine core loop. It could have corrupted the telemetry cache." Strickland smirked. "You're here to support, not reinvent. Don't mistake presence for position." Khalil didn't respond. His silence filled the room like smoke. Strickland stood and walked toward the window, arms behind his back. "Look, let's not make this more than it is. We brought you in to look like we're changing. Don't get it twisted." It landed like a punch. He'd heard versions of that line his whole life, from prep school counselors who told him to manage his tone, from internship managers who said he intimidated peers with his vocabulary. Now here it was, naked and official. "You're not here because you're brilliant. You're here because you're black." Later that week, his workstation was moved to the far end of Beijing, next to the storage crates and away from the core simulation terminals. His badge still said LVL-7, but it felt like LVL-1. During a group test for the Vesta launch plan, he noticed a minor but critical flaw in the backup ignition algorithm. He flagged it, annotated the risk model, and sent it up the chain. No response. 2 days passed. Then a new document appeared in the shared drive. Vesta Launch Protocol, V3.7. Khalil opened it, expecting the same version he'd reviewed earlier. Instead, he froze. The schematic had been altered. His proposed adjustments were integrated, line for line, but something was off. At the bottom of the page, in the metadata, a name was listed. Morrison Khalil. He hadn't submitted that version. He hadn't even finalized it. Someone had taken his work, modified it slightly, and uploaded it under his name, without permission, without warning. If it failed, the blame would fall directly on him. His cursor hovered over the file for a long moment, and then his inbox pinged. Subject inquiry. Unauthorized file submission. His pulse spiked. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had set him up. Khalil discovers someone has altered his classified launched schematic and signed his name. The email stared at him like a loaded gun. Subject inquiry. Unauthorized file submission. There was no greeting, no name, no signature. Just a line of internal protocol jargon and a link to schedule a disciplinary meeting. Khalil sat frozen at his desk in Beijing, surrounded by humming servers and the soft clatter of keyboards. No one looked at him. No one needed to. This was how it worked here. Questions were knives, and silence was the sheath. But even as his blood ran cold, Khalil's mind sharpened. He knew he hadn't submitted that file. He knew someone had taken his notes, polished them just enough to make them look volatile, and uploaded them under his name. Not to praise him, not to share credit, to frame him cleverly, quietly, and perfectly. He didn't speak to anyone the rest of the day. He pretended to review metrics, but he was digging line by line, file by file through the internal system logs, and then just before midnight, buried under layers of subfolders with names like System Backup 3 and Test Template Old, he found it, an access trail. His badge ID had been used on a terminal he never touched. Station 14, near the upper mezzanine, used mostly by senior command. The access timestamp was 3:16 a.m., a time he was sleeping at home. Someone had spoofed his credentials. It wasn't just sabotage, it was orchestration. To understand how Khalil had even made it to Orion, you had to go back, far back, before the badge, before the degrees, before the stolen credit. He was raised on the south side of Atlanta. His mother, Denise Morrison, had been a wiring technician on the NASA Pathfinder project before federal cuts slashed her team in half and her job disappeared with it. She never talked much about the layoffs, but Khalil remembered the way she still cleaned her hands with solvent every night, even after she started working at a grocery store. His father, Dr. Royce Morrison, taught American civil rights history at Morehouse. A quiet man who spoke with precision and carried books like other men carried weapons. He taught Khalil to read at age 3 and debate at age 8. "You will not be allowed to be average," Royce once said over the kitchen table. "So don't be. Be undeniable." That was the fire in Khalil's chest, the night he rebuilt his first telemetry sensor out of scrap radio parts. It was what pushed him to Georgia Tech, where he triple majored in aerospace engineering, applied physics, and computer modeling, graduating at the top of his class, while working 2 jobs to survive. But undeniable didn't mean unshakable. Especially not here. At Orion, it wasn't what was said, it was what wasn't. In meetings he noticed how his slides were always skipped for time, how the floor would go quiet the moment he offered an idea, then come alive the second someone else echoed it. He watched Chris, the same Chris who once asked if Khalil's hair was military regulation, get applauded for proposing an air-to-ground heatsink formula. Khalil had developed and emailed to the team 3 days prior. He confronted Halverson about it once. Just once. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about the source of that calculation." Halverson barely looked up. "We're not doing source tracing here, Morrison. We're moving as a team." Team. It always meant something different when you were the only one who looked like you. Then came the scrubbed launch. Vesta's test window had been scheduled for Thursday morning. Khalil had flagged a cooling valve delay issue in the booster's diagnostics 2 weeks prior, sent the report with red highlights and detailed timestamps. No one responded. The launch was delayed mid-countdown, costing millions. At the post-mortem briefing, Strickland's words hit like bricks wrapped in velvet. "We trust our senior team's experience. This delay reflects what happens when protocols aren't followed closely. Some contributors may be too green for mission-critical input." Khalil didn't speak. He just stared down at the report he'd printed 2 weeks ago, still sitting unopened in front of Halverson. One evening, As the facility emptied and the halls grew dim, Khalil walked through the outer corridor of the data processing wing. He wasn't headed anywhere, just drifting, following that feeling that something was wrong, that he wasn't missing things. He was being missed, deliberately. That's when he noticed something on one of the terminals. A pop-up window still open. Just for a second. It flashed and disappeared. He sat down, ran a trace, opened the temp logs.
There it was.
A folder, hidden in a subdirectory only accessible to level 9 plus staff. Find file, WB overwide. It was encrypted, and it didn't match any project tag he'd ever seen.
WB.
He stared at the letters. Whiteboard, warning bulletin, or something else. He copied the access path to a drive, closed everything, walked out. That night, back at his apartment, Khalil stared at the monitor in his home office. The encryption level was beyond basic security. It was military grade. Whoever created it didn't want anyone reading it without authorization, or maybe they didn't want him reading it. He tried 3 decryption tools. All failed. Then he noticed something even stranger. The metadata said the file was created 2 years ago, 2 years before he was ever hired. So why was his name listed in the access permissions? Who had tagged him before he arrived? He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, his father's voice returned. Systems aren't broken, Khalil. They're built that way. The next morning, he walked into Beiji like a soldier in enemy territory. He didn't trust a soul. Not Halverson, not Chris, not even the polite intern who brought coffee and always said sir. Every compliment felt poisoned. Every smile felt like strategy. That afternoon, he passed Strickland in the hallway. Strickland stopped. Rough week, Morrison. Khalil nodded. Little bit. You know, you remind me of someone. Sir? Strickland chuckled. Had this kid back in '09. Real sharp, real eager. Thought the rules were suggestions. You know where he is now? No, sir. Exactly. The commander clapped him on the back and kept walking. Khalil didn't move. His palms were clenched. He knew exactly what that meant. Later that evening, while reviewing diagnostic logs in silence, Khalil's console pinged with a new message. It was anonymous. No subject. No greeting. Just one sentence. Stop asking questions you weren't hired to ask. Khalil finds an encrypted folder on the internal system labeled WB Override. The locker appeared on a Monday morning, wedged between the fire extinguisher and a rusted janitor's cabinet, in the dimmest corner of Beijing. It wasn't like the others, gleaming steel rows reserved for senior engineers. No, this one looked borrowed from a high school gym. Dented, unpainted, with a broken latch that whined when open. On it, someone had scrawled in thick marker, Wakanda Tech. At first, Khalil stood there in silence. He looked around. No one flinched. No one claimed it. But a few glanced up from their workstations and quickly looked back down, feigning focus. The message was clear. He wasn't seen as a colleague. He was decoration. Diversity theater. He didn't report it. Not right away. Because deep down, he already knew what HR would say. That same day, during the morning stand-up, a new software patch failed in the propulsion loop. Khalil diagnosed the issue in under a minute. An overlooked input buffer overflowing the system's error handling threshold. He tried to explain. Buffer stacks reaching max capacity, he said. It's misfiring because the priority loop isn't filtering redundancies. Halverson blinked slowly, then looked around the room. Can someone translate that, he smirked. Sorry, Morrison. What dialect is that? Compton? Laughter trickled through the team. Not loud, but sharp enough to cut. Khalil didn't laugh. He didn't flinch. He just sat back down, adjusted his screen, and went to work. Later that week, someone leaked screenshots from the internal team chat. One thread read, Chris J. Falcon's got another theory, y'all. Dana Des. Token Falcon be soaring with them. Spicy takes again. Max. He speaks in Matrix code, I swear. Just nod and say nice work. Khalil found the thread after a junior intern forwarded it to him, anonymously with a one-line note. Not everyone in here is laughing. He took it to the HR rep, a slender man named Greg, with a nervous smile skimmed through the screenshots, nodding. Well, this isn't ideal, but it seems like casual banter. Nothing directly threatening. It's racially loaded, Khalil said calmly. They're mocking my voice, my name, my ideas. Right, but there's no explicit slur. So it's hard to escalate this beyond a sensitivity reminder. Khalil leaned forward. So unless they use the N-word, it's fair game? Greg shifted uncomfortably. I'm just saying, our escalation policy is very specific. I can file a note, maybe schedule a group discussion about inclusivity. Khalil walked out mid-sentence. In the weeks that followed, he stopped talking. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he knew they weren't listening. His suggestions in team meetings dwindled to bullet point slides. His questions went unanswered. When he did speak, they shifted in their chairs, checked their watches, or suddenly lost Wi-Fi. So he buried himself in code. Deep technical, airtight code. Something they couldn't ignore, couldn't twist, couldn't dismiss. He began designing a new stabilization framework for vertical descent re-entry, a system that could correct atmospheric drift in real time, minimizing fuel waste and increasing safety margins by It was beautiful. He tested it 67 times, ran full simulations across 3 mock launch sequences. No failures. He labeled the file Apollo curve.b2 Morrison draft, tagged it private, and saved it on his encrypted local drive. Then he made a mistake. He uploaded it, briefly, to the Orion Sandbox network for simulation syncing. He only needed it there for 20 minutes. Then he wiped it. Or thought he did. One Friday just before 5 p.m., an internal newsletter landed in everyone's inbox. Subject: NASA-backed review. Innovative launch code enters phase 2. Khalil clicked it. His stomach dropped. The article was short, a glowing summary of a groundbreaking real-time launch stabilization protocol, lauded by a panel of NASA engineers as a potential leap in atmospheric control. The article credited one engineer, Christopher B. Kelly. Chris. Khalil read the article 3 times, then opened the code attached to the NASA submission. It was his code. Identical. Line by line. Even the name of one key function, Royce Vector Sync, a personal homage to his father, remained untouched. They hadn't even bothered to change it. He stormed into Halvorson's office. For once the door was already open. Halvorson looked up, eyebrows raised. Something on your mind? Khalil placed the article and code printouts on his desk. This is mine. Halvorson flipped through the pages, slow, then leaned back. I'm not a code reviewer, Morrison. If there's been a submission error, take it to project management. You know this isn't an error. Halvorson didn't blink. You uploaded it to the sandbox. That makes it team-shared property. I deleted it. Nothing's ever truly deleted on Orion servers. You should know that. Khalil stepped back. You stole my work. No, Halvorson said calmly. The team elevated your draft. That's how collaboration works. Khalil wanted to scream, but he didn't. He just nodded, slowly. Noted. Halvorson smiled faintly. Glad we understand each other. He went home in silence. That night, he stood in the kitchen of his small apartment, hands trembling over the sink. The faucet dripped like a metronome. His father's words echoed again, this time hollow. Be undeniable. But even undeniable truth could be buried if enough people agreed to deny it. He opened his laptop, ran the same trace sequence he used before. Nothing in the metadata linked Chris to the upload. No logs, no fingerprints. It had been scrubbed clean, almost professionally. He checked the access logs for the sandbox folder. Most were general batch IDs, shared credentials used across shifts. Except one. An unfamiliar ID, with elevated access clearance. WBX9 over. His eyes narrowed. WB. Just like the encrypted folder from before. His code gets presented to NASA, under someone else's name. The Monday after the NASA newsletter dropped, Beiji felt colder than usual. Not in temperature but in energy. Khalil walked in with a manila folder in one hand, jaw tight, and eyes forward. He wasn't here to negotiate. Not this time. Not after seeing his name erased from the biggest technical leap in Orion's propulsion division. He made a direct line for project management. No email, no scheduled appointment. Just a knock, a pause, and the door opened. Inside, a thin man in a gray Orion fleece looked up from a holographic schematic. Manager Logan Pressman, former marine logistics specialist, turned corporate filter. His entire job was to turn chaos into protocol, and protocol into bureaucracy. Khalil placed the folder on his desk and spoke with precision. Code-based draft, Apollo curve.b2 Morrison draft, my original design. My function names, line-by-line comparison to the NASA submitted version, authored by Chris Kelly. Logan stared at the folder, then at Khalil. I understand your frustration, Mr. Morrison. But once something's uploaded to a shared dev environment, it becomes part of a team iteration process. There's no individual attribution in sandbox code. That sandbox code had a private label, tagged to my login. Logan offered a corporate shrug. Then take it up with legal. I can't reverse credit already given. Khalil's lips parted, then closed. He didn't curse, didn't yell. He simply nodded, picked up the folder, and turned to leave. Just don't make this political, Logan said without looking up. Khalil stopped at the door. Everything here is political. I'm just not allowed to admit it. By midweek, an official notice landed in his inbox. Subject: Conduct Review. Notice of verbal warning. The reason: insubordination. Citing his unauthorized confrontation with leadership and disruption of project cohesion. It was signed not by Logan, or even Halvorson, but by Colonel Strickland himself. Khalil stared at the digital signature. They weren't even pretending anymore. That evening, while collecting printouts from the backup server room, he ran into Walter Green, senior technician, 62 years old, with thick hands and a low, rumbling voice. Walter had been at Orion for 28 years. He'd seen programs rise and fall, seen engineers come and go. He knew how the game was played, and how it was rigged. You look like someone just told you gravity's a myth, Walter said, leaning against the file cabinet. They gave me a warning, Khalil said quietly, for confronting them about stealing my work. Walter didn't look surprised. They'll smile while they rob you, he said. Seen it too many times. You shine too bright, and they say you're trying to blind them. Khalil sat on the edge of the console table. So what? Just keep my head down. Pretend I don't see what's happening? Walter shook his head. No. But know what you're doing. You're brilliant, Khalil. But brilliance scares them when it's wrapped in brown skin. It's not just about being right. It's about knowing which truths they'll let you tell. Khalil looked him in the eye. Then maybe it's time to make them listen. Walter exhaled. Long and slow. Just make sure when you speak, your house is clean. 'Cause the second you raise your voice, they'll check your shoes for mud. The next morning, Khalil filed a formal grievance. He submitted a 14-page report to Orion HR and Legal Affairs detailing the theft of intellectual property, the coordinated credit reassignment, and the metadata showing the original authorship of Apollo Curve. He copied 2 external parties, the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs and NASA's Office of Inspector General. It was a risk, a loud one. Within 24 hours, his badge access downgraded from level 7 to level 4. He was locked out of Beiji's simulation rig. His calendar was wiped. Standing meeting invites gone. When he asked about it, it told him, just a systems refresh should be temporary. It wasn't. He asked Halvorson if he was still on the Vesta project. Projects evolve. Morrison. So do roles. That was all he said. Khalil spent the next few days working from the auxiliary diagnostics bay, an underused room filled with outdated monitors and half-decommissioned servers. It smelled like stale coffee and forgotten potential, but he worked anyway. He ran independent models, built predictive algorithms, polished his code so tight it glowed. If they wouldn't let him on the mission, he'd make it impossible for them to fly without him. But even he didn't expect what happened next. Thursday morning, a department-wide alert went out. Mandatory briefing. Vesta Phase 4 Mission Review 0930 hours. Main conference hall. Khalil's heart thumped. Phase 4 was the next step. The full-stack integration. The stage he had personally designed, organized, and coded. He rushed to the hall, badge trembling in his pocket. Inside, the lights dimmed. A large screen projected the Vesta timeline. Strickland stood at the podium, his posture rigid, his voice smooth. This next phase will define Orion's future position in national aerospace leadership. I'm proud to present the roster leading the Phase 4 rollout. He gestured to the screen. A list of names appeared. Chris Kelly, Dana Simmons, Max Ewan. Khalil Morrison was not on it. Not as lead, not as support, not even as an observer. He scanned the crowd. No one made eye contact. Strickland continued. This team represents the very best of Orion's innovation. High-efficiency collaborators who've proven they can execute under pressure. The phrase lingered. High-efficiency collaborators. Khalil heard the message beneath it. Not whistleblowers, not troublemakers, not people who made them uncomfortable. When the briefing ended, he stood outside the conference hall alone, fists buried in his pockets, air trembling with silence. Behind him, the doors swung open. Chris passed by, gave a slight nod, and walked on. But it wasn't Chris who caught his attention. It was Walter, standing at the far end of the hallway, arms crossed. He gave Khalil a single slow nod, and then turned and walked away. A new mission briefing is called, and Khalil's name is missing from the project roster he created. The morning after the Phase 4 briefing, Khalil's email pinged with a short message from Operations. Administrative error. Your name was left off the project roster. Should have been included. No apology. No meeting. No reinstatement. Just 10 words tossed like a towel on the floor. Khalil replied immediately, asking for clarification. Would his access be restored? Would he be added to the official planning schedule? Would his Phase 4 code responsibilities be acknowledged? He received no reply. By noon, his badge still wouldn't open the Vesta simulation lab. By 3 p.m., his desk had been reassigned. He asked HR. They told him the change was temporary. He asked his new supervisor in auxiliary diagnostics, a balding systems tech named Keith, who spent most of his day watching sports highlights with earbuds in. Keith shrugged. They rotate people all the time, bro. Probably just balancing headcounts. But Khalil saw it for what it was. He was being quietly relocated, isolated, neutralized. And it wasn't just him. That same week, he ran into Brianna Alston, a black materials chemist who used to run composites testing in Bay F. She looked tired, paler than usual. Her badge now read Temp Clearance, Level 2. They moved me off the heat shield program. She whispered over lunch in the outdoor courtyard. Said they're reassessing departmental priorities. Gave my position to a contractor. One of Strickland's referrals. What about your prototype? Khalil asked. They shelved it, she said. 3 years of work. Gone. Khalil's stomach turned. He checked the internal staff database that evening. Something didn't feel right. By midnight, he'd built a list. 9 black and brown engineers had been reassigned, downgraded, or moved to non-essential roles in the last 6 months. 7 of them had filed complaints in the past. None of them remained on any active project rosters. Some were still listed as pending renewal. Some, like Brianna, didn't know if their badge would even work next week. The next day, a whisper reached him through the back channels. Walter flagged him down near the west stairwell, where cameras didn't reach. There's a meeting, he said low. Not public. Not on any calendar. Khalil narrowed his eyes. What kind of meeting? Leadership? Section heads only. No notes. No agenda. Why tell me? Because I've seen meetings like this before, Walter said, and the last time it happened, 5 engineers disappeared off the staff list the next month. Khalil didn't ask questions, just followed. They slipped into the old maintenance hallway and found a quiet panel access point with a direct audio feed from the main conference room. Walter had rigged it years ago, back when surveillance misplacements were a norm. They listened. Strickland's voice echoed sharply through the duct. This isn't about exclusion. It's about streamlining, he said. Orion's strength has always come from alignment, from shared values. I'm initiating the mission purity protocol starting next quarter. The room went silent. Then someone, probably Halverson, spoke. Won't that raise equity flags? Especially with NASA watching. We'll frame it as a culture optimization audit, Strickland said. People who don't mesh with the mission will naturally opt out, or be phased out. There was a murmur of agreement. Then Strickland added, we're not running a social experiment here. We're building rockets. It's time to stop pretending we need quotas to do it. Walter looked at Khalil, jaw clenched. They're calling it a protocol, Walter whispered. But it's a purge. That night, Khalil didn't sleep. He logged into the back-end system through his limited access account and began to trace connections. He tracked name removals from projects. He tracked badge downgrades. He correlated HR complaints with assignment shifts. The pattern wasn't just clear. It was calculated. Every single minority staffer who had challenged leadership, either verbally through email or quietly through HR, had been reassigned, removed, or marked as non-essential within. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a purge with a smile. Then, while reviewing the Phase 4 launch framework, still viewable in read-only mode, Khalil saw something strange in the propulsion testing parameters. A minor line of code, almost invisible. A delay trigger tied to the heat shielding routine. Not a crash, not an explosion, just a subtle misfire. A thermal lag that would destabilize the vertical descent calculation if left unchecked. It was the kind of bug you'd never see, unless you wrote the base logic yourself. Khalil leaned forward, heart pounding. The code was inserted under a batch upload ID, WBX9 over Y. Again, the same hidden ID he saw during the Apollo curve theft. This wasn't just theft or sabotage. This was something else. Deliberate miscalculation, masked as incompetence. And if they ran a live test with that line intact, the result could be catastrophic. Was someone trying to undermine the mission? Or set up another scapegoat? Maybe him. He copied the line, saved the log. And as he stared at the screen, one question echoed through his mind. Why would someone want the next launch to fail? Khalil uncovers a hidden line of code that could sabotage the next test launch. Khalil didn't hesitate. By 7:13 a.m., the sabotage code was printed, annotated and uploaded into a sealed report. He titled it, Priority Risk, Phase 4 Launch Integrity Compromised. Immediate review required. He triple-checked the logic, cross-referenced system logs, and appended screenshots of the corrupted line tagged to WBX9 override. He routed the report through internal compliance, CC'd project leads, and sent a flagged copy to Strickland himself. The launch window for Phase 4 testing was 48 hours away. If that code went live, the simulation data would collapse, and worse, any real test based on it could damage the payload. He wasn't reporting a typo. He was trying to save the mission. At 9:06 a.m., his Orion email was disabled. By 9:18, two uniformed security officers met him outside the diagnostics bay. "Mr. Morrison, we're going to need you to come with us." The taller one said. "Why?" "Command decision," the other officer replied. "I just submitted a system-critical report. Has anyone reviewed it?" "Sir, this is not a discussion." Khalil didn't resist. But as they walked him down the corridor, past his old desk in Bay G, past the engineers who now refused to meet his eyes, he realized this wasn't about safety. It was about silencing. They walked him out the front gates. No warning. No explanation. "Pending investigation," one officer said before handing him a printed notice. "You've been placed on administrative leave until further review." Review of what? The paper didn't say, but the subtext was clear. You pushed too hard. You asked too many questions. You weren't hired to protect the mission. You were hired to decorate it. The next day, the media storm hit. An Orion-linked account leaked a vague press statement to a defense news outlet. Internal disruption under review. Recent technical concerns raised by a junior engineer are being investigated. No threat to mission timeline expected. But the headline ran with its own spin. Disgruntled black engineer disrupts military mission amid tensions at Orion base. Within hours, the right-wing blogs picked it up. Affirmative action hire tries to sabotage rocket test. NASA partner faces setback, thanks to DEI disaster. Why color over competence is destroying aerospace. The comments were worse. He was called a fraud, a liar, a woke plant. Someone even tweeted that Khalil should be arrested for treason. His inbox overflowed with death threats. His landlord called about media pressure on the apartment complex. Georgia Tech's alumni office emailed to say they were reviewing his status in the Distinguished Innovators program. Even his high school's website took down his profile. Khalil sat on the floor of his dark apartment, shades drawn, watching his career burn in real time. All for trying to protect the thing he loved most. His work. His phone rang. Unknown number. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again, and again. Then came a text from Walter. "Meet me. 8 p.m. Corner of Peachtree and 17th. No delay." Khalil didn't think twice. Walter sat in his truck, engine idling, old jazz humming through the radio. His face was tense, eyes scanning the sidewalk like a man waiting for a ghost. Khalil climbed in. Walter didn't speak for a moment. Then he handed over a small matte black flash drive. "No label. No network traces. Don't plug it in on anything connected to the internet." Khalil frowned. "What is this?" Walter exhaled through his nose. Everything they've been trying to bury for 30 years. He didn't elaborate. He just stared out the windshield and said, "Back when I joined, they used to call us paper cuts. Said we were only here to make their racism look better on paper. So I started saving things. Quietly. Letters, memos, emails, complaints that never got answered, names that disappeared off payroll." Khalil turned the drive over in his palm. "Why now?" "Because they've picked you as the fall guy. But you don't have to go down alone." Khalil swallowed. "What's on here?" "Everything," Walter said. "Every bias complaint, every HR redirection, and something worse, something about a system A whole network of overrides they used to shift blame, reassign failure, erase dissent. Khalil's chest tightened. Walter looked at him. You found it too. Khalil nodded slowly. I don't know what it stands for yet, Walter said, but I know what it does. It silences people like us before we become threats. Khalil stared out the window at the dark city skyline. Then maybe it's time we speak louder. Walter hands Khalil a secret flash drive with decades of hidden racial bias reports. Khalil waited until the city went quiet. No humming engines from the parking lot. No news alerts lighting up his phone. No voices through thin apartment walls. Just the stillness of midnight pressing against the windows like fog. He turned off his smartphone, yanked the Ethernet cable from his modem, and powered up an old Dell laptop, the one from his junior year at Georgia Tech. It was a dinosaur, scratched, dented, patched together with duct tape. But it had no wireless card, no cloud sync, no spyware. In this moment, that made it perfect. He took a breath and slid in the black flash drive Walter had handed him. No label, no serial, nothing that tied it to anything else in the world. The screen stayed dark for a moment, then blinked alive with a blinking cursor. Khalil typed, "Open access main." A flicker. Then files, rows and rows of them, spilled onto the screen like names on a war memorial. Each one dated, coded, and chillingly direct. 1996 T. Williams Promotion Block X5. 201 Warden Badge. Freeze. 2009. Kendra G. Prototype Credit Swipe. 2015 DPETO Clearance. Downgrade F7. 2018 J. Cervantes. HR Complaint Closed. Each was a case. A life. A career bent or broken under the same invisible pressure. Khalil now knew by name, but hadn't fully seen until now. He clicked on the file marked 209 Kendra J. Prototype Credit Swipe. Inside, screenshots of internal emails, memos, Slack logs, and an archived project database. Kendra Jackson, a black propulsion analyst, had created a heat dissipation prototype that exceeded expectations in testing. Within weeks, the prototype was credited to a senior white engineer. Kendra had filed a complaint. A month later, she was reassigned to a documentation team. A month after that, let go for performance misalignment. No appeal, no protection, just silence. Khalil clicked through more. Each story, a carbon copy of his own, echoing across decades. He paused at one folder titled WB Protocols Operational 1994-2024. He opened it. Inside were 27 documents, policy frameworks, operation handbooks, annotated strategy guides. All were internal, all classified, and all built around a term he'd only seen whispered before. EDIFying white balance. He blinked at the screen. White balance? Not white people, he realized. White structure, white appearance, white control. The first document was titled Operational White Balance. He began reading. In high-visibility teams where diversity optics are necessary but cultural uniformity is mission-critical, we recommend the adoption of a white balance structure to maintain cohesion. Goals include visual diversity with controlled authority distribution, minimized escalation events, and maximum media-safe collaboration optics. It was all there. How to redirect whistleblowers without triggering lawsuits. How to credit white staff with minority-led work using metadata shifts. How to sunset black staff through performance reevaluations, timed with audit-free fiscal quarters. One line hit hardest. Visibility without voice is ideal. Praise publicly, isolate structurally. Khalil scrolled, mouth dry. Page after page showed not just strategy, but intent. These weren't accidents. This wasn't bias. This was an institutional operating system. The same one he'd been fed into. The same one that erased him from his own work. Then he saw a folder labeled, Unacknowledged Innovations, Internal Archive. His hand trembled as he clicked it. Inside, a scroll of buried breakthroughs, projects either cancelled, reassigned, or falsely attributed. But halfway down the list, his breath caught. 2024 AP Curve Master BKP Morrison. VEET. He opened it. His original Apollo curve code. Everything. The full framework. The same unique logic strings. The same custom sequence he'd named Royce Vector Sync, his quiet tribute to his father. It was all there. Metadata. Created Feb 3. Author, Khalil Morrison. Accessed, 0 time. No edit. No trace of Chris Kelly or anyone else. Just his work. Saved. Archived. And hidden. He wasn't paranoid. They hadn't ignored him. They'd recorded him. documented him, silently contained him. They'd used his ideas, stripped his name, then buried the original so no one could ever trace the truth. His chest tightened. He leaned back, staring at the screen, trying to breathe through it. The rage, the humiliation, the sheer, brutal clarity. They knew he was brilliant. That's why they erased him. Because genius, wrapped in brown skin, with an unapologetic mind, and a backbone, they didn't know what to do with that. So they labeled it a problem, and solved it. By 4 a.m., Khalil had copied the entire drive twice. One copy went into a lockbox under his bed, the other into a micro SD card, slid behind the battery of a burner phone he kept in a shoebox of emergency supplies. Then he booted up his main phone. Notifications exploded across the screen. News alerts, Twitter tags,
missed calls,
text from journalists, friends, even distant cousins he hadn't heard from in years. But one alert froze him in place. Breaking: Orion confirms Phase 4 Vesta launch today. Countdown underway. Final algorithm credited to Chris Kelly. He tapped it open. There it was. A full-color article. Photo: Chris standing confidently in front of a wall-sized simulation readout. Khalil's readout. Quote, "This propulsion logic revolutionizes our trajectory stabilization. It's an honor to carry the torch into the next phase of space tech." Then, Strickland's voice. "We succeed by aligning the right minds with the right roles." Chris delivered when it mattered. Khalil scrolled faster. At the bottom of the article, live countdown, 3 hours, 50. He stared at the clock. They were using his algorithm, exactly as he wrote it, to power the most ambitious launch Orion had attempted in a decade. The code Walter once called poetry and precision. The code they said wasn't ready when he wrote it. The code they stole, repackaged, and now paraded in front of the world. And his name wasn't on any of it. His apartment was dead silent, but Khalil's ears rang with memory. Every dismissal, every smirk, every time they called him Falcon, every email he sent that went unopened. He tore a blank sheet from his printer, and wrote one line in thick black ink. "Truth is more permanent than silence." He taped it to his wall. Then he opened his laptop, drafted a new email. Subject:
Whistleblower report. Federal innovation, attribution fraud, urgent.
attachments,
all WB protocol documents, employee removal logs, email trails, photos of redacted staff, screenshot of the Apollo curve metadata, audio snippet of Strickland's mission purity directive, the full unedited code. Morrison v. He sent it to 3 independent newsrooms, 2 federal oversight agencies,
NASA's Ethics Review Board,
a retired black aerospace engineer who once told him, "If you ever need someone who understands, call me." Then he sent it. All of it. No hesitation. No second guessing. It was time. He refreshed the countdown site. 2 hours, 48. It was happening. They were about to lift off with his legacy, and none of them knew that the truth was already rising faster than any rocket. He poured a cup of coffee, sat at his desk, and waited. Because when the launch reached the stars, so would the scandal. He wasn't invisible anymore. Not today. The launch countdown begins, using his plan, without credit. They said the skies were perfect for launch. Clear. Uninterrupted. A slow wind sweeping across the Florida coast. Just enough to whisper but not enough to disrupt. At exactly 11 a.m. Eastern, the Vesta rocket stood upright like a monument. Tall, still shimmering with anticipation. The world watched from everywhere. Newsrooms, classrooms, war rooms, and bedrooms. Live feeds streamed across 100 nations. Inside Orion's command center, Colonel Strickland adjusted his tie in the reflection of the main console screen. Behind him, engineers and analysts buzzed like bees before a bloom. The pressure was electric, but the press releases were already written. Success had been declared before ignition. "Initiate primary sequence," Strickland ordered. From his apartment, Khalil watched it all unfold. His TV muted, his laptop glowing. The code executing on the launch simulation matched exactly the final backup he had uncovered. Every curvature calculation, every timing control, every stabilizer coefficient. He recognized the way it responded to atmosphere drag, a nuance he'd written after a sleepless night 4 months earlier. It was his work. His. And the world had no idea. Stage 1 engines ready. Fuel integrity confirmed. Telemetry green. At T-5 seconds, the rocket rumbled. At 0, it rose. The fire beneath it bloomed like a sunburst. Violent, flawless, precise. Khalil leaned forward, the coffee on his desk gone cold. The Vesta sliced into the sky with surgical grace. Crowds erupted across the globe. The media called it historic. The New York Times banner blared. Flawless launch. Vesta soars into orbit, marking Orion's greatest achievement yet. On screen, Strickland gave a live post-launch interview. "We knew we had something special," he said, smoothing his uniform collar. "But it wasn't just about one breakthrough. It was a team effort, one that came from rigorous discipline, clarity of leadership, and trust in the system." Khalil narrowed his eyes. Trust in the system. That same system that erased him, moved him, discredited him, silenced him. He looked back at the printout taped to his wall, a screenshot of the Apollo curve metadata with his name, his timestamp, his creation date. They didn't deny the genius. They just denied him. By 2 p.m., the media narrative was in full bloom. Chris Kelly was trending on every platform. Engineer of the moment. Black tech excellence. Proof that DI works. The irony tasted bitter in Khalil's mouth. He wasn't angry at Chris. Not fully. Chris had always played the game, the way they wanted it played. Friendly. Apolitical. Technically sound but never threatening. Acceptable. And now, convenient. What stung deeper was how the same people who mocked Khalil behind his back, who called him Token Falcon, were now celebrating diversity through Chris's face. False representation. A facade. Because what they praised wasn't the presence. It was the absence of disruption. At 3:47 p.m., Khalil received a message on his burner phone. A name he didn't recognize. MK Shade. Subject: "They erased you. I can prove it." Attached a zip file, encrypted, locked behind a password. He hesitated, then replied, "Who are you?" The response came instantly. "You don't know me, but I'm inside, and I've had enough." Inside the file were internal emails from the week before the launch. Email subject: "Attribution adjustments, Phase 4 external reports." From Chris Kelly to Logan Pressman, Strickland, Halverson. Per previous conversations, I've reviewed the Morrison V2 framework and cleaned it for presentation, removing line tags with personal identifiers. Suggest we shift to final team iteration language in all documentation. Per optics, suggest we don't name individual contributors outside final public-facing doc. This avoids any unnecessary spotlighting of prior staff. Note: Morrison is still flagged as under review. Khalil stared. There it was. Proof. They didn't just forget to credit him. They intentionally removed his name, erased him on purpose, and covered it with words like team iteration and optics. He responded to MK Shade. "Why are you helping me?" The reply: "Because I watched you get buried alive, and I'm done watching." Khalil didn't cry. He didn't shout. He didn't break anything. He just stared at the screen, jaw clenched, a single thought spiraling through him. They thought I'd disappear. They thought he'd vanish quietly, accept the loss, and fade into a footnote. But they didn't know what Walter had given him, or what he had already sent out. The media storm was already seeded, and something else was coming. That evening, while the nation celebrated, his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Washington, D.C. area code. He let it go to voicemail. The message came through moments later. A woman's voice, calm, clipped, direct. "Mr. Morrison, this is Deputy Director Maya Garrison, with the Federal Office of Aerospace Oversight. I've reviewed your whistleblower file. I believe you're telling the truth, and I believe others will too. I need to speak with you. This stays off the record, for now. But I strongly advise you not to ignore this call. We'll arrange a secure location. I'll be in touch." Khalil played the message twice, then a third time. He sat perfectly still in his chair, the laptop still open, the image of the rocket mid-launch frozen on the screen. They had launched with his genius, but they had no idea what was about to come back down. A top official from D.C. reaches out to Khalil for a confidential meeting. Khalil met Maya Garrison in a diner just off Constitution Avenue. Booth in the back, shades pulled down, no escorts, no suits, just 2 mugs of black coffee between them, and a world that had no idea the storm that was coming. She didn't look like a federal deputy. No clipboard, no power suit. She wore an old Orion windbreaker, navy, with a faded patch near the collar. He noticed the name stitched under the logo, Garrison. "I didn't leave on good terms," she said without flinching. Khalil waited. She didn't offer small talk. "I was on the 2011 Delta X team," she continued. Lead flight analysis. Rewrote the fallback loop for a stage 3 abort. Saved the mission. Never got credited. What happened? Filed a complaint. 2 weeks later, my clearance was downgraded. My project access frozen. They called it realignment and gave my work to a guy I trained. She stirred her coffee once. Eventually, I got out. Rebuilt. And now I sit on the other side, watching the same pattern play out over and over, until your file landed on my desk. Khalil stared at her. You believe me? I believed you before I opened the files, she said, because I've seen how they do it. Over and over. She didn't mince words. You go public, it's going to hurt. She warned. They'll smear your name, question your timing, paint you bitter. They'll call you ungrateful, difficult, unstable, especially unstable. They love that one.
Khalil nodded. He already knew.
But if you stay quiet, Maya added, they win. Again. He didn't answer right away. His mind was already cycling through the possibilities. He'd grown up watching the takedowns whistleblowers turned into punchlines. The black engineers who vanished from headlines after their interviews dried up. People reduced to hashtags. Maya leaned forward. Your story's clean. The evidence is airtight. But the only way it changes anything is if people see it, feel it. Khalil exhaled. So how do I make them listen? She pulled a folded card from her coat pocket. Start with someone who already wants the story. The call came 3 hours later. A producer from Real-Time 360, one of the country's top uncensored political commentary shows. The kind that didn't just chase headlines. They shaped them. We want to hear your side. Live. Prime time, she said. Unfiltered. Khalil's hand tightened around the phone. Why me? Because your name's already floating, she replied. The documents you leaked? We verified them. And the people behind them? We've been tracking for years. But no one would go on record until now. He didn't say yes. Not yet. The next 48 hours were chaos. His phone lit up non-stop. News outlets trying to confirm his identity. Tech blogs posting vague leaked source stories. YouTubers speculating that the Apollo curve algorithm had actually come from an unknown black engineer recently placed on leave. But the support didn't outweigh the backlash. Once his name hit the open web, the trolls came fast. Photoshopped memes, fake LinkedIn screenshots claiming he'd lied on his resume. Claims that he was trying to ruin space exploration for woke points. Even his high school's alumni board issued a statement saying they were concerned by the controversy. Georgia Tech removed his photo from their innovator's wall. His landlord emailed him a reminder about the clause in his lease regarding public disruptions. And in the middle of it all, his sister called. Mom saw the news. She whispered. She's scared. I'm fine, Khalil said. No. She's scared they're going to bury you like they buried Dad. The line went quiet. Then she said, You sure you want to keep going? Khalil looked at the wall across from him. The printed metadata from his launch code still hung there. His name. His timestamp. His truth. Yes, he said. The next morning, Maya called. You've been vetted, she said. They'll go soft at first. Let you speak. But it won't stay soft. You're hitting power. Real power. And it's going to hit back. I know. She paused. Then it's time. That afternoon, Real-Time 360 released the teaser. Tonight, whistleblower behind Vesta launch cover-up speaks live and uncensored. A black and white silhouette in the preview.
No name.
No title. Just the words. They launched with my code and buried my name. The internet exploded. Comment threads split into firestorms. Some called him brave. Others called him a fraud. Some debated the merits of team contributions versus individual credit. Some just posted flame emojis. But the narrative was shifting. And by nightfall, every eye in the industry, and beyond, was waiting to hear what Khalil Morrison had to say. He stood backstage under hot lights, watching a monitor play clips of the Vesta launch over ambient music. The anchor's voice rang out.
This is the story the government didn't want told. The engineer they tried to erase. Tonight we hand him the mic.
Khalil closed his eyes, took one deep breath, then stepped into the light. A national interview offer comes in. Live, primetime, uncensored. The lights were so bright they blurred the edges of the studio. Khalil sat on the stage alone, across from the Real-Time 360 anchor, a sharp, composed black woman named Zora Bennett, known for two things, cutting through spin and refusing to interrupt pain. We're live in 5, someone whispered off camera. He sat with his palms pressed together, his back straight. No note cards, no lawyer, no second chances. The countdown ended. Zora opened gently. Mr. Morrison, thank you for joining us. Khalil's voice didn't waver. Thank you for seeing me. Then for the first time in front of millions, he told the truth. Not just about the Apollo curve code, but about the laughter behind his back. The locker labeled Wakanda Tech. The way his contributions were edited, then erased. The metadata they buried. The stolen launch. The folder named White Balance. I wasn't the first, he said. And if nothing changes, I won't be the last. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't break down. He spoke with the calm ache of someone who had carried truth like a weight too long. Zora's final question cut deep. What would you say to the people who think you're only speaking now because you're angry? Khalil looked directly into the camera. I am angry, he said. But I'm also right. The clip went viral in minutes. Within an hour, the interview was trending in 5 countries. The silence Khalil had lived under for years, shattered into noise, sharp, messy, uncontrollable noise. Some called him a hero, others, a liar. News anchors praised his poise. Corporate lawyers scrambled behind closed doors. Publicly, Orion released a neutral statement. We are reviewing Mr. Morrison's claims and remain committed to an equitable workplace. But privately, the machine turned, fast. That same night, a Twitter thread appeared, under the handle A Mission Insider X. Anonymous, but timed too perfectly to be coincidence. The thread alleged a pattern of erratic behavior from Khalil during his time at Orion. It cited conflicts with team leadership, hostile tone in correspondence, and an ability to take feedback. Then came the screenshots. Cropped emails with passive-aggressive lines pulled out of context, comments about emotional distance, and a blurry photo of Khalil sitting alone at lunch with the caption, "Not a team player." The smear campaign had begun. By morning, 3 major outlets ran fact-check stories with watered-down headlines. Was whistleblower too unstable for Orion's high-stress culture? Engineering giant responds to allegations. But who's really at fault? Racism or oversensitivity? The debate behind the launch. The comment sections boiled over. Just another DI hire crying foul. That he wasn't even the smartest on the team. Typical woke sabotage. Cry your way to a book deal. It didn't matter that his evidence was verifiable. That the documents were real. That the Apollo curve code had been publicly dissected and matched to his original version. The truth didn't trend like drama. Then came the official blow. Orion's legal department sent him a cease and desist. They claimed he had violated internal confidentiality policies. They said he'd accessed restricted materials without proper clearance. They alleged unapproved data transfer. They didn't challenge the racism. They challenged him. Strickland appeared on a defense sector podcast that evening. His tone was composed. The words, surgical. I believe in team unity, he said. We tried to support Mr. Morrison, but unfortunately, some individuals mistake feedback for oppression. I can't speak to his mental state, but clearly there were personal challenges. He didn't have to say more. The damage was done. They weren't denying his intelligence anymore. They were attacking his sanity. Khalil stopped checking his inbox, stopped reading the news. His sister begged him to come stay with her. His mother wouldn't sleep. Walter called only once. Keep receipts, he said. They will twist everything. Then he hung up. 2 days later, Khalil tried to reach Walter again. No answer. He called the Orion baseline. Asked for Walter Green. The operator paused. I'm sorry, sir. There's no one by that name listed in our employee database. Khalil blinked. What? He's been there for almost 30 years. Sir, I'm looking at the directory now. There's no one matching that description. He tried Walter's personal number again. Straight to voicemail. He texted, call me. Please. Nothing. Not even a read receipt. Khalil checked the whistleblower folder. Walter's name was on 5 internal documents. His badge ID appeared in dozens of logs. And now he was just gone. Erased. Walter mysteriously disappears from base without a trace. Khalil stopped speaking. No more interviews. No retweets. No statements to the press. His face faded from the headlines, replaced by new controversies, newer distractions. But behind the scenes, the real war began. And it was fought in silence. Every day, another leak. Not from Khalil directly. He was too smart for that. But from somewhere, maybe everywhere. Encrypted folders, burned drives, emails routed through throwaway domains, and anonymous Proton accounts. One by one, the rot was exposed. A video from inside Orion's HR department. A training slide titled How to De-escalate Diversity Complaints Before Legal Review. An audio clip of Logan Pressman joking in a team meeting. We don't need another Bradley situation. This time we're scrubbing tags early. A metadata log from a Phase 3 code repo, showing time-stamped edits by Khalil deleted and overwritten under Chris Kelly's login just hours before the NASA presentation. One leak featured a blurred screenshot of an internal Slack thread from Colonel Strickland himself. If this DI push goes any further, we'll be renaming the launch pad after Malcolm X. Keep it clean, gentlemen. We're building rockets, not safe spaces. That one hit the hardest. It was the first time the public saw the mask slip. Orion tried to downplay it, taken out of context, fabricated files, disgruntled sources, but the damage was already spreading. Defense contractors began stalling Orion's upcoming bids. NASA made a rare public comment, stating that all launch partners will be reviewed for procedural transparency and ethical integrity. Journalists who had ignored Khalil's early warnings now ran full exposés with phrases like institutional rot and performance theater. And yet Orion's command still denied him. Mr. Morrison was never a lead engineer, they said. Just a temporary support analyst brought in for overflow support. There's no record of him authoring the final Apollo curve framework, just a contractor. That phrase echoed like a bullet through bone. But Khalil didn't take the bait. He didn't respond publicly. Not once. He let the truth talk louder than outrage. Each day, he added more to the quiet archive. He and Maya met weekly in a locked basement at a safe house co-op outside DC. No phones, no Wi-Fi, just files, timelines, and matching patterns. This isn't just about one launch, Maya said. We're mapping a 2-decade pattern of erasure. And you're the proof of concept. Khalil nodded. I'm not trying to go viral anymore, he said. I'm trying to make it permanent. By March, an anonymous archive surfaced online under the name Project Voiceless. It was a searchable repository, verified documents, scanned reports, HR memos, audit trails, and testimonies. Khalil's name wasn't listed anywhere. But his fingerprints were on everything. Within 72 hours, it had 1.2 million views. By the end of the week, a group of former Orion employees, most of them Black, Latinx, or Asian American, began issuing statements in support of the leak. One wrote, I was told to dial back my energy in meetings. When I built a better version of the comms array, my badge was locked the next day. They told me my style didn't fit Orion culture. You're not alone, Khalil. Another simply posted, white balance isn't new. We've just never had the proof before. The silence became a movement, a kind of strategic stillness that couldn't be mocked or discredited. Because you can't out-yell a truth that's already written in code. But the pressure, like always, found its way back. Khalil's building received a letter from management, requesting that he cease any activities that may disrupt the reputation or image of the complex. His personal bank account was flagged for review due to suspicious online transfers, none of which he'd made. His mother received a visit from 2 energy surveyors asking about her son's whereabouts. They wore suits. They didn't leave a card. Even Maya had her email account compromised. She had to go completely dark for a week. Still, the leaks didn't stop. They intensified. And then one night, a private investigator showed up at Khalil's door. Not with threats. With confirmation. You've got eyes on you from people way above Orion now, the PI said, voice low. Some of them want to help. Some want to bury this. But either way, you're past the point of no return. Khalil nodded. I crossed the day they flew with my mind and lied with my name. A week later it arrived. A heavy envelope, embossed seal. Federal. Khalil opened it with steady hands. Inside, subpoena, U.S. House Committee on Science, Space and Technology. Subject testimony on aerospace ethics, innovation attribution and internal discrimination claims. Scheduled hearing, May. Location Capitol Building. Room. He stared at it for a long time. The silence was over. A congressional hearing is scheduled. And Khalil is subpoenaed. Capitol Hill had never felt colder. Not because of the weather, but because of the eyes. Khalil sat at the long wooden table, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that didn't quite hide how tense his shoulders were. Cameras lined the walls. Every news network had sent a crew. The room was packed with reporters, analysts, government aides, and somewhere behind the glass, a quiet nation that had followed his story for weeks. The placard in front of him read, Mr. Khalil Morrison, aerospace systems engineer, former. To his left sat a DOG representative. To his right, an empty seat. He looked straight ahead, as the chairwoman of the committee, Congresswoman Evelyn Boyd, cleared her throat and tapped the mic. This hearing will now come to order. Today's session pertains to allegations of systemic misconduct, intellectual theft, and structural discrimination within Orion Space Command in connection to the Vesta Phase 4 mission. Her tone was neutral, but the tension in the room wasn't. They opened with protocol questions, clarifications about titles, timelines, badge clearances. But it didn't take long before the edge showed. Congressman David Langley from Texas leaned forward, adjusting his cufflinks before speaking. "Mr. Morrison," he said smoothly, "do you believe your treatment at Orion was unique? Or perhaps the result of cultural differences in a high-performance environment?" Khalil didn't blink. It wasn't cultural. It was structural. Langley nodded slowly. "I see. And would you say you were ever intimidated by the excellence of your peers?" The air in the room turned to ice. Khalil's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. "No, Congressman. Excellence doesn't intimidate me. It inspires me. Theft, on the other hand, intimidates no one. It just insults everyone." Langley leaned back, stone-faced. The chairwoman stepped in before it could spiral. For the next hour, Khalil presented his case. He didn't dramatize. He didn't lecture. He walked them through it, calmly, precisely, like the engineer he was. The code files, the metadata, the emails, the WB protocols, and a video of Colonel Strickland's off-the-record comments about safe spaces and cultural cohesion. Khalil ended with a statement, as controlled as it was devastating. "I wasn't the only one. I was just the one they couldn't keep quiet." Then the doors opened, and Maya Garrison walked in, not alone. Behind her, a quiet line of people, men and women of every age, every race, filed into the gallery and sat. Khalil counted 47. Each wore a white badge with black letters. "What?" Congresswoman Boyd raised an eyebrow. "Maya?" Maya stepped forward, voice clear.
"Madam Chairwoman, with permission, I submit supplementary testimony from 47 former and current Orion employees, engineers, analysts, technicians, and administrative staff who corroborate Mr. Morrison's account and offer their own."
Boyd looked stunned. "Are these vetted?" "Each affidavit is notarized, identity verified and backed by internal data leaks your committee already received." "Proceed." The room shifted. The air changed. Testimony after testimony rolled in, spoken aloud, summarized from written files, each more damning than the last. One described being told to tone down your passion after questioning a project timeline. Another detailed being passed over for promotion 3 times in favor of less qualified white colleagues. And then came the bombshell. A former mission control analyst, Carlos Vega, took the mic. "I was on the diagnostic team during the Phase 2 failure," he said. "We caught a heat dispersion error 4 hours before countdown. Strickland was notified. He ignored it. Ordered us to proceed. The mission lost 19 million in damage. He blamed the team and quietly removed the whistleblower. That whistleblower was Walter Green." Maya's eyes flickered toward Khalil. Khalil's fists curled under the table. This wasn't just about erasure anymore. This was negligence. Buried. By the end of the session, every face in the room looked different. Not angry. Not shocked. Something deeper. Ashamed. Congresswoman Boyd took a breath. "Thank you all for your courage. This committee will enter these testimonies and exhibits into the permanent record, and will convene an internal ethics review immediately." She glanced at her staff, then at the military advisor seated behind her. "Until further notice, all Orion launches are suspended pending Department of Defense investigation and congressional oversight review." The room went silent. Khalil didn't smile. He didn't move. He just closed his eyes. It had taken everything to get here. And now the countdown had begun, not to a rocket, but to a reckoning. The Pentagon halts all Orion launches pending review. The official announcement came in the form of a single paragraph. Colonel Gerald Strickland has voluntarily resigned from his position at Orion Space Command, effective immediately, following internal and congressional inquiries. We thank him for his decades of leadership and service. No apology, no admission, no reckoning. Just another man in power walking away without consequence. But the resignation wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the second act. The part where the villain changes clothes, rewrites his script, and walks back on stage as the misunderstood hero. Strickland's next appearance was not in uniform. It was in civilian dress, seated casually on a velvet armchair opposite a primetime cable news anchor, known for fear-mongering monologues about cancel culture and woke overreach. The chyron below him read, "The Fall of a Patriot. Strickland speaks out." His voice was calm, collected. "I didn't step down because I did anything wrong," he said. "I stepped down because I refused to play political games with people who never built a damn thing in their lives." The anchor nodded solemnly, as if Strickland had been convicted without a trial, hanged in public by a mob of engineers and journalists who dared to question the purity of a launchpad. "We had one job," Strickland continued. "Build excellence. But now it's about quotas, about headlines, about making people feel like they belong instead of finding people who actually do." It was subtle, but the message was clear. The system didn't fail. The people who questioned it did. Khalil watched it from his apartment. The volume muted. He didn't need to hear the word. He'd lived them. He knew that smirk, that faux humility, that dog whistle language hidden behind phrases like culture integrity and team cohesion. They had always found new ways to make the problem sound like the solution. The next day, his email pinged. Subject: Private Resolution Proposal. Orion Legal Affairs. The body of the message was cold and technical, corporate warmth, wrapped in legalese. "We recognize the complexity of recent events and remain committed to quiet, equitable closure. Our firm is prepared to offer you a confidential settlement, totaling $5.5 million in exchange for withdrawal of claims, an assigned mutual non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement. Attached a 43-page NDA and a boilerplate withdrawal form." Maya reviewed it. "It's clean," she said. "Legally airtight. You take it, you disappear. No trial, no press, no truth. But a lot of quiet." Khalil leaned back, arms crossed. "They think I'll trade my name for a number. They're betting on fatigue," she said. "And they're not wrong. Most people do." Later that night, his sister called. $5.5 million, Khalil. "That's not hush money. That's a future. It's a muzzle. It's stability. You could go back to school. Build your own firm. You've made your point." He didn't answer. "I'm just saying," she continued. "They buried Dad for less, and he didn't get a second chance." That last line hung in the air like smoke. The next morning, his mother didn't speak. She simply handed him an envelope, yellowed at the edges, soft from years of handling. Inside was a clipping from technician laid off amid restructuring. Denise Morrison among 30. Khalil turned it over. A note was scrawled in the corner in her neat, stubborn handwriting. "They took my credit. Don't let them take yours." Over the next few days, the pressure ratcheted up. A former professor emailed him, writing in careful language about weighing your impact versus your legacy. A former Orion colleague reached out under a burner account, whispering warnings about private surveillance and background character assassinations. Even Georgia Tech alumni reps reached out, offering to quietly reinstate his profile on the innovator's wall once the legal matter settles. But only if it settles, and only quietly. Still, he said nothing. Let the silence make them sweat. Then the news shifted. Strickland was now a regular on political talk shows. He had a podcast, a ghost-written op-ed in the Washington Sentinel titled, "Why I Refuse to Apologize for Leading with Excellence." The PR team at Orion rebranded their narrative. Instead of defending Strickland, they pointed fingers sideways. A public memo read, "The internal confusion during Phase 4 was the result of overlapping policy interpretations, not discriminatory practice. Any inconsistencies were unintentional and are being addressed through updated guidelines." They even rolled out a new diversity initiative. New colors on their website. A scholarship for underrepresented interns. Optics everywhere. Then on a Sunday morning, just after sunrise, Khalil stood on the courthouse steps in D.C. He wasn't flanked by cameras. He didn't make a speech. He simply handed the file to the clerk. Morrison v. Orion Space Command. Et al. Filed, United States District Court. Civil Action Number 20. Charges: retaliatory discharge, systemic racial discrimination, intellectual property theft, constructive dismissal, violation of federal innovation attribution standards. He turned down $5.5 million. He turned down silence, and he chose the fight. The filing spread quickly. The media treated it like a sequel. The blogs dissected it line by line. But the real change happened in whispers. Anonymous forums filled with aerospace engineers from other firms. Threads titled, "He's saying what we've all seen." That launch was stolen. Period. We've got receipts too. A petition began circulating in industry circles, demanding independent audits of other contractors. NASA released a quiet statement, acknowledging the seriousness of Morrison's claims and the need for continued evaluation of partner integrity. Back in his apartment, Khalil watched it all unfold with a strange calm. He knew the legal fight ahead would be brutal. Depositions, discovery, counterclaims. They'd try to stall it, discredit him again, maybe even drown him in delays. But this wasn't about speed. It was about permanence. He looked again at the printout on his wall. His code, his name, his timestamp. He whispered to himself, "This time they don't get to rewrite me." Khalil walks away from the money and files a federal lawsuit. The lawsuit wasn't meant to set the world ablaze. That was the irony. Orion executives had always assumed that legal battles, even high-stakes ones, would simmer quietly in the margins of news cycles, filed away in court dockets between headlines. They forgot who Khalil Morrison was. Within 48 hours of filing, the court docket had gone viral. Headlines didn't say plaintiff sues employer. They read, "The Rocket Architect versus the Rocket Company." On social media, someone had posted the lawsuit's key graphic, a split image of Khalil and the rocket's Stage 4 schematic overlaid with text. He built the ship. They stole the launch. By morning, that image had been shared over 1,000,000 times. At the Orion Houston headquarters flagship campus, protesters materialized. Signs sprouted like wildflowers after a storm. Credit the creator. No more silent engineers. Innovation isn't a marketing ploy. Campus security looked on helplessly as crowds of grad students, professors, and Boeing engineers circled the facility. Georgia Tech, MIT, and Stanford schools, that once competed for visibility, now stood in solidarity. Students carried poster-sized prints of Apollo curve code slides, with Khalil's annotations highlighted in neon yellow. They chanted,
Voice matters. Code matters. Human matter.
The myth of the sleek, apolitical aerospace hero was cracking. Inside, senior Orion leaders drafted de-escalation memos. Language shifted overnight. Terms like cultural pride and heritage innovation programs started appearing in boardroom slides. But tone-deaf PR couldn't mask the unraveling. They had been betting on his fatigue, bet on his voice fading, bet he'd choose $5.5 million, sign the NDA, and walk quietly into the night. But there was a twist they didn't foresee. Around week 2, the leaks turned into testimonials. One by one, former Orion engineers surfaced. Online, cautious, careful. Each short text began with, "I watched the messages get scrubbed from my project. I edited a control loop, and then got reassigned to admin tasks." They didn't say it was about race, but the word didn't need to be spoken. Like dominoes, this triggered a cascade of stories. Once muted voices found each other through encrypted emails, burner accounts, and secured Slack channels. The case became a movement. The New Yorker published a cover image of Khalil, not the code he wrote, but his silhouette lit from behind by the launch gases. Caption: redefining liftoff. He had entered the cultural vocabulary. Khalil wasn't just suing, he had become the symbol, the improbable hero against a polished institution. In a pivot nobody saw coming, a high-profile board member resigned. Dr. Lena Forsyth, astrophysicist, tenured academic, wept when she announced it from the lecture hall at Johns Hopkins. "We were told to endorse silence," she said. Voice trembling, she said, "But this violence of erasure, I saw it too many times." Her exit was not a bomb. It was a butterfly flapping its wings. But that flap triggered a hurricane. Now the narrative had traction. Journalists dug into every Orion launch since. Credit lists were cross-referenced, patents examined, internal wikis archived. Within days, attorneys representing other ex-staff filed friend-of-the-court briefs supporting Morrison's case. They argued institutional systemic erasure. The media pace intensified. National front-page stories, Sunday morning talk shows, debated the cost of credit, the cost of silence. Khalil sat behind the headlines, still quiet. His name was everywhere, yet he said nothing. Because this time, his silence had purpose. He let the archives speak for themselves. Then the judge's ruling landed. Discovery Order 7, Orion Space Command. You are ordered to produce, with no redactions, all historical employment records, from to be submitted to plaintiffs, public record, media, and educational archives. No non-disclosure clauses. No exceptions. Maya and Khalil reviewed the page. He exhaled, unsteady. She placed a hand on his arm. They're going to choke on their own paper trail. He nodded quietly, as if naming a long-predicted storm in his head. The world responded. Twitter feed exploded with Nope and Orion records. Former staff tweeted, "My project files verified. Promotion denial logs. Public. I'm still unpaid contract labor." The data. It was public truth now. Orion had no choice but to watch its own secrets become headlines. In his empty apartment, Khalil stared at the pack of printouts from the court. Years of data. Every badge issuance. Every anonymous exit memo. Every credit log. He never thought his name would matter this much. But in the end, the greatest cost was never money. It was truth. He didn't need riches. He chose right. Outside, protest signs had grown larger. Across multiple campuses, protests spilled into faculty meetings, classrooms, and Zoom panels. The code was still advancing space tech. But now, credit for labor was also advancing. He shifted the orbit of the narrative, started a new trajectory, and then came the quietest moment yet. A single text on his burner phone. "They're posting the first batch in 24 hours. Brace yourself." He locked the documents and tapped the wall where his metadata printout still lived. He whispered, "Let them choke." The court demands Orion release all historical employment records, publicly. Years passed. Decades, some would say, but to Khalil, time had a strange way of stretching and looping, like the orbits he once charted so meticulously. He had aged, not in complacency, but in every scar, every hesitation, now held purpose. Every victory, quiet but irreversible. Atlantis, Wakanda, dreams of black excellence, had once felt like distant fantasies. But now, in the heart of Atlanta, his firm, Ether Dynamics, had transformed those fantasies into standards. Ether Dynamics, headquartered in an unassuming warehouse district outside downtown, breathed differently than Orion ever did. White walls were rare. Every corridor bustled with dark brown biracial multilingual engineers, reservists, STEM students, all picked not for brand alignment, but for brilliance and grit. The diversity wasn't curated. It grew organically. Every intern had a mentor. Everyone's voice was logged on the project files under their own username and initials. Every design acknowledged its author. Integrity wasn't a slogan. It was policy. The firm's core design, the Phoenix thrust loop, was an evolved iteration of Khalil's Apollo curve code. It now powered most medium-lift launch vehicles across private aerospace and national scientific agencies. Built from the same logic, honed through iteration, grounded in atmospheric dynamics, but written anew. And every time a vertical rocket took off using that algorithm, the quiet whispers acknowledged, the man who built the world's most stigmatized launch plan built the world's most reliable one. Still, Khalil didn't gloat. Instead, he taught. He traveled to underserved high schools. Compton, Newark, New Orleans. He'd walk into rooms of skeptical teenagers and say, "They said, I didn't belong. So I built a lab where you belong, even if they told you that word doesn't mean you." He'd hand out blueprints, not business cards. Let students pore over nozzle designs, heat sink calculations, gyroscope alignment strategies, as though they were bedside stories. He showed them that exceptional code could be written in spaces where hope got permission to exist. Within Ether, Khalil instituted a Sponsor Your Future program. Talent scouts were sent to community colleges and vocational schools. Candidates weren't hired for grades. They were hired for curiosity. If someone asked the bright question, they got a workstation. If they investigated a line of code on their own, they got a mentor. Generations of overlooked engineers began to stand taller, and then much more soar. On a muted June morning, 9 years after the lawsuit, Khalil sat in a government archives office, surrounded by old mission logs from Orion's Vesta mission. The files he once thought lost, the files others thought his to use and discard. He now held them in respectable e-readers and printed binders, side by side with newly updated government mission logs, honoring his authorship. He opened the public archive, still thinking they might redact or omit, but there it was. Vesta Phase 4, Primary Systems Design, Morrison Khalil, verified contributor. Just one line. But behind it, the unburnable proof that you can't take someone's chill and erase their fire. He closed it and refused the temptation to tear up. Instead, he exhaled. And then came what equity can't always tell you. In the old repurposed Orion Lab Museum, where once his locker had been slashed with slurs, beneath fake grins, now stood a polished steel plaque. Cold, black mat. He approached. Inscribed, in honor of those who were told they didn't belong. No name. No date. Just a line that carried the weight of a generation. Khalil touched it gently, felt the silence of every erased engineer, every silenced whisper. He closed his eyes. He hadn't become a symbol. He'd become a doorway. But as he stood there, a tour group walked by, a mix of young engineers and industry students. Their guide lingered on the plaque, voice shaking. This is where the narrative shifted, she said. Not an empire, just an emblem. Khalil nodded, unseen, watching people stop to inhale a truth that once cost him everything. Outside, the world kept changing. News broke that several aerospace firms were revising internal innovation logs to properly credit minority contributors, citing Ether's model as the inspiration. A federal advisory board used Phoenix Thrust as the basis for a new equity in innovation policy. His name floated comfortably in those conversations. And in his living room at home, Khalil, older now, graying only where he smiled most, watched a documentary feature on the black tech renaissance. They showcased blueprints, lighthouse labs, a generation powered by ideas, not invitations. And they ended with the same plaque, the same lines, echoing. He allowed himself a small, proud smile. He didn't rebuild Wakanda. He built something better. He built a way. He built proof. And so he walked back out, leaving behind the plaque that stood for every silent push, every drawn blueprint out of darkness, every erased name restored. The world watched. And for once, belonging took first place. Khalil returns to the lab, where it all began, and the new plaque reads, in honor of those who were told they didn't belong. Some names never make it into history books because they were never meant to. But when truth speaks louder than silence, the world has to listen. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or erased, type yes. If you believe in justice, and subscribe if this story broke your heart.